Some mothers-in-law think they own their sons forever. Mine learned the hard way that underestimating a woman's worth comes with a price tag she never saw coming. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. Because today's story is about turning their judgment into your greatest victory. My name is Wren. I am 28 years old, and I live in Cedar Falls, Iowa, a place where everyone knows everyone else's business. And family loyalty is supposed to mean everything. I thought I understood what loyalty meant until I married into the Hartwell family and discovered that some bonds are more like chains, designed to keep you exactly where they want you. 3 years ago, I was a different person, softer around the edges, quicker to apologize, always trying to prove I belonged in a family that had already decided I didn't. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a local agricultural equipment company. Nothing glamorous but honest work that I was proud of. I met Dylan Hartwell at a company barbecue where his family's business was a vendor. He was charming in that Midwest way, steady hands, easy smile, the kind of man who opened car doors and remembered your coffee order. What I didn't realize was that Dylan came with strings attached, and his mother Constance held every single one. Constance Hartwell was the kind of woman who wore pearls to grocery shop and considered herself the unofficial mayor of our neighborhood. She'd built her identity around being the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the woman who sacrificed everything for her family's success. Her husband had passed away when Dylan was in college, leaving behind a successful farm supply business and a life insurance policy that Constance had parlayed into multiple rental properties around town. She was comfortable, influential, and absolutely convinced that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious only son. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like I was livestock at auction. "So you're the girl Dylan's been talking about," she said, not bothering to hide her disappointment. "Marketing, is it? How nice. Dylan mentioned you're from Minnesota originally." The way she said Minnesota made it sound like I'd crawled out of a swamp somewhere. "I was born in Duluth, where my father worked for the Port Authority, and my mother taught elementary school, good, hard-working people who raised me to be independent and self-sufficient. But to Constance, I was an outsider who'd somehow tricked her son into caring about me." The criticism started small. Comments about my hair too short for a woman, she said. Questions about my cooking skills. Didn't my mother teach me to make a proper roast? Suggestions that maybe I should consider staying home once Dylan and I got serious, because a man needed a wife who could focus on making a proper home. Dylan would laugh it off. "Mom's old-fashioned," he'd say. "She'll come around once she gets to know you better." But Constance never seemed interested in getting to know me better. She was too busy cataloguing my deficiencies. When Dylan proposed after 2 years of dating, I was over the moon. The ring was beautiful, his grandmother's. Diamond reset in a modern band. But even that became a source of tension. "I hope you understand the significance of wearing great-grandmother Hartwell's ring," Constance told me the next time I saw her. "It's been in our family for 4 generations. I trust you'll treat it with the respect it deserves." The wedding planning was a nightmare. Every decision I made was wrong in Constance's eyes. The flowers were too modern, the venue too casual, the menu too ambitious for someone who wasn't really a cook. She inserted herself into every conversation with our vendors, often contradicting choices Dylan and I had already made. When I finally lost my temper and asked Dylan to speak to his mother about boundaries, he looked at me like I'd suggested. "We eloped to Vegas. She's just excited," he said. "This is her only child getting married. Can't you just let her have this?" But it wasn't her wedding to have. It was mine, and she was systematically erasing me from it. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the ceremony. I'd arranged to meet with our caterer to finalize the menu, a decision Dylan and I had made together after tasting sessions and careful budget discussions. I arrived at the restaurant to find Constance already there, calmly explaining to the caterer that there had been a misunderstanding about the menu. The bride is young and doesn't really understand what guests expect at a proper wedding. She was saying, "I think we need to go with something more traditional, more appropriate." I stood in that doorway for a long moment, watching my future mother-in-law rewrite my wedding to suit her vision of what Dylan's wife should be. Not who I was, but who she thought I should become. "Actually," I said, stepping into the room, "there's been no misunderstanding. The menu we selected is exactly what Dylan and I want for our wedding." Constance turned to me with that patient smile she'd perfected over the years. "Wren, dear, I know you think you know what's best, but I've been to more weddings than you've had birthdays. Trust me on this." "I trust myself," I replied evenly. "This is my wedding, Constance. Mine and Dylan's, not yours." The smile faltered. "I see. Well, I suppose we'll see how that works out for you." It was the first time she'd dropped the pretense of maternal concern and let me see the steel underneath. I should have paid more attention to that warning. The wedding itself was beautiful. Despite Constance's best efforts, Dylan looked handsome in his grandfather's cufflinks, and I felt radiant in my dress, a simple but elegant design that I'd chosen myself, over Constance's objections that it was too modern for a church ceremony. My parents had flown in from Duluth and were charmed by Cedar Falls, by Dylan, by the whole small-town romance of it all. But even on my wedding day, Constance couldn't resist making her feelings known. During the mother-son dance, I watched her whisper something in Dylan's ear that made his face go tight. Later, when people were congratulating us, she made a point of telling several guests that she hoped Dylan had chosen wisely, and that only time would tell. If I was really wife material, I should have confronted her right then. I should have pulled Dylan aside and demanded he address his mother's behavior instead. I smiled through gritted teeth and told myself that things would be different once we were actually married. Once I'd proven myself as a wife. I was so naive. The first year of marriage was an education in passive aggression. Constance had a key to our house, a wedding gift from Dylan that I'd protested but eventually accepted in the name of family harmony. She used it liberally, showing up unannounced to drop off casseroles I hadn't asked for, or to help with housework that didn't need doing. She'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets while I was at work, claiming she was just trying to make things more efficient. She'd leave articles clipped from magazines about keeping your husband happy, or the importance of home cooking on my counter. When I got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, she made a point of asking Dylan if he was sure he was comfortable with me working so much. Dylan seemed oblivious to most of it. Or maybe he just didn't want to see it when I tried to talk to him about his mother's behavior. He'd sigh and say things like, "She means well, Wren. She's just trying to help." When I pointed out that I didn't need or want her kind of help, he'd accuse me of being oversensitive or looking for problems that weren't there. The breaking point came in our second year of marriage. Dylan and I had been trying to start a family, and after several months of unsuccessful attempts, we decided to see a fertility specialist. It was a private, emotional process that we'd agreed to keep between ourselves until we had more information. I should have known Constance would find out somehow. She had her ways of extracting information from Dylan, usually through a combination of guilt and maternal concern that he seemed powerless to resist. I came home from work one Thursday to find her sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of pamphlets spread out in front of her. "Wren, dear," she said without preamble, "Dylan mentioned you two have been having some difficulties. I thought you might find these helpful." The pamphlets were about fertility treatments, adoption agencies, and most insulting of all natural ways to increase your chances of conception, as if my inability to get pregnant immediately was somehow a failure of my womanhood that could be corrected with the right diet and attitude. Dylan had no right to discuss our private medical situation with you, I said, my voice shaking with fury. He's my son, Constance replied calmly. He's worried about you, about the stress you're putting on yourself and your marriage. I'm just trying to help by violating our privacy and making assumptions about my body. This isn't helping, Constance. This is interfering. She stood up then, gathering her pamphlets with deliberate slowness. I can see you're upset, so I'll leave these here for you to look at when you're feeling more rational. But Wren, dear, I have to say a truly supportive wife wouldn't make her husband choose between his mother and his marriage. Dylan loves you, but he needs a partner who understands the importance of family. After she left, I sat at that kitchen table and cried, until I couldn't breathe. Not just because of her cruelty, but because I realized Dylan had shared our most intimate struggles with the one person who'd never wanted us to succeed in the first place. That night, when Dylan came home from work, I was waiting for him with the pamphlets spread across the coffee table. We need to talk, I said. He looked at the pamphlets and his face went pale. Wren, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you told your mother about our fertility appointments? About something we agreed to keep private? She could tell. Something was wrong, he said, sinking into his chair. She kept asking if you were okay, if we were happy. I didn't mean to tell her everything, but she's so good at reading people. She's good at manipulating people, I corrected. There's a difference. That's not fair. Mum cares about us. She wants us to be happy. No, Dylan. She wants you to be happy with someone who isn't me. There's a difference there too. We fought until nearly midnight, and for the first time since we'd gotten married, Dylan slept in the guest room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become the villain in my own marriage. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. Constance seemed to sense that she'd found my breaking point, and she pressed her advantage ruthlessly. She started making comments about my appearance. Was I losing weight? I looked tired. Maybe I should consider taking some time off work to focus on my health and my marriage. She volunteered to help me redecorate our house to make it more welcoming and family-friendly. She began inviting herself to dinner multiple times a week, claiming she was worried Dylan wasn't eating properly. The worst part was watching Dylan retreat into himself. He stopped defending me, stopped even trying to see things from my perspective. When I'd complain about his mother's behavior, he'd just shut down, claiming he was tired of being caught in the middle. But there was no middle, there was his mother's side, and there was wrong. 6 months later, at a family barbecue that Constance had organized without consulting me, she delivered the final blow. I was in the kitchen, helping to prepare desserts, when I overheard her talking to Dylan's Aunt Margaret in the living room. They didn't realize. I could hear them through the pass-through window. I just don't understand what Dylan sees in her, Constance was saying. She's so difficult, always causing drama, always making everything about herself. She seems nice enough. Margaret replied diplomatically. Oh, she can put on a good show when she wants to. But Margaret, I have to tell you, I don't think she's wife material. Not really. She's too selfish, too career-focused. Dylan needs someone who can support him, not someone who's constantly demanding attention and creating problems. Well, they're already married, Constance. What's done is done. Is it, though? Dylan's still young. He could start over with someone more suitable, someone who understands what it means to be a proper wife. I stood frozen in that kitchen, holding a bowl of whipped cream and listening to my mother-in-law plan my husband's future with someone else. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty in her voice that I was disposable. It broke something inside me that I didn't even know could break. That night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were washed, I confronted Dylan about what I'd heard. She didn't mean it the way it sounded, he said. not quite meeting my eyes. How did she mean it then? Because it sounded like she was planning your next marriage before this one was even over. Mom's protective. Sometimes she says things without thinking. She's been saying things without thinking for 3 years, Dylan. When does it stop? When do you finally choose your wife over your mother? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why do I have to choose? Why can't you just find a way to get along with her?" That's when I knew. After 3 years of marriage, 2 years of engagement, and 5 years of trying to prove myself worthy of a place in the Hartwell family, I finally understood the truth. I would never be enough, not because of who I was, but because Constance would never allow me to be. That weekend, while Dylan was at a golf tournament with his college friends, I drove to Des Moines to consult with a divorce attorney. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. "Tell me about your situation," she said. Settling back in her leather chair with a legal pad, I told her everything about Constance's interference, about the fertility violations, about the constant undermining and emotional manipulation, about Dylan's refusal to set boundaries or protect our marriage from his mother's influence. "What are we talking about in terms of assets?" Patricia asked when I finished. "That's where it gets complicated," I said. "Dylan and I own our house jointly. We both put money down, both our names on the mortgage. But Constance contributed significantly to the down payment as a wedding gift. $25,000. Patricia made a note. Gift alone. Gift officially. She made a big show of it at our engagement party, talking about how she wanted to help us start our marriage on solid financial footing. Any documentation of that? Oh yes, Constance loves documentation. She had a formal gift letter drawn up with witnesses and everything. She said it was to avoid any confusion later. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that probably made opposing attorneys nervous. "And your husband's business interests?" "He's part owner in the family farm supply business that Constance inherited from her late husband. She brought Dylan in as a partner 2 years ago, gave him a 40% stake as a wedding gift to both of us." Again, lots of documentation. Interesting. And the house value? We had it appraised last month for refinancing purposes. $210,000. We owe about $160 on the mortgage. Patricia was quiet for a moment, making calculations. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want to be clear about something. In Iowa, any gifts given to a married couple are generally considered marital property, regardless of the source. That includes your mother-in-law's contributions to your home and your husband's business interests." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that if you divorce, you're entitled to half of everything, including the portions that came from Constance. She can call it a gift to her son all she wants, but legally, it was a gift to the marriage." For the first time in months, I smiled. "How much are we talking about?" "Conservatively, the house equity is $50,000, so $25,000 there. The business stake is harder to value without a full assessment, but based on the tax records you've brought, I'd estimate at least another $40,000. You're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $65,000. $65,000, the exact amount Constance had invested in keeping her son happy and his wife in line. Money she'd used as leverage to maintain control over our marriage, our home, our future. Money that would become mine the moment I filed for divorce. I spent the next 3 weeks documenting everything. I photographed the gift letters, copied business documents, gathered bank statements and property records. I was methodical, thorough, and very, very careful not to let Dylan or Constance know what I was planning. During those 3 weeks, I also made some decisions about my future. I updated my resume and started discreetly reaching out to contacts in Des Moines and Minneapolis. I opened my own bank account and began slowly transferring money from our joint accounts, nothing dramatic, just small amounts that wouldn't be noticed immediately. Most importantly, I started planning my exit strategy with the kind of precision Constance herself would have admired. The opportunity came in the form of another family dinner. Constance had invited us over for Sunday lunch, ostensibly to celebrate Dylan's birthday. I knew it would be the perfect setting for what I had planned. Lots of family witnesses, plenty of documentation opportunities, and Constance at her most confident and controlling. I arrived early, while Dylan was still at his morning workout. Constance answered the door in her best church dress, pearl earrings catching the light. "Wren, dear," she said with that practiced smile. "You're early, Dylan's not here yet." "I know," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "I wanted to talk to you privately." Something in my tone must have alerted her, because her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, let's sit in the living room." I followed her into the perfectly appointed living room with its antique furniture and family photos. Dozens of pictures of Dylan at every stage of his life, but only 2 that included me, both from our wedding day. "Constance," I began, settling into the chair across from her, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for Dylan and me over the past 3 years. She looked surprised but pleased. "Well, that's very sweet of you to say, dear. I mean it. The down payment on our house, bringing Dylan into the family, business, all the guidance you've provided about marriage and being a proper wife. You've been very involved. I just want what's best for my son," she said carefully. "I know you do, and I think I finally understand what that is." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are divorce papers, Constance. I'm filing tomorrow morning." The color drained from her face. "What?" "Wren, that's ridiculous. You and Dylan can work through whatever problems you're having." "We could, if Dylan were willing to work on them, but he's not. He's made it very clear that when forced to choose between his mother and his wife, he'll choose his mother every time." "That's not true. Dylan loves you. Dylan loves the idea of me, but he's never been willing to stand up for the reality of me. And you've never wanted him to." Constance stood up, her composure cracking. "You can't do this to him, to our family. Marriage is about commitment, about working through difficulties." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Marriage is about commitment. It's about 2 people choosing each other every day, protecting their relationship from outside interference, creating boundaries with extended family when necessary. Dylan and I haven't had that kind of marriage, largely because you've never allowed us to. I've done everything I could to support your marriage." "No, Constance, you've done everything you could to control it. There's a difference." I stood and walked to the mantelpiece, where a photo of Dylan's father sat in a silver frame. "You know what I realized? You're not protecting Dylan. You're protecting yourself. You're so afraid of being irrelevant in his life that you've sabotaged his chance at having a real partnership with anyone else." "That's not true," she whispered. "Isn't it? Tell me, Constance, what happens when Dylan remarries? Because he will eventually. Will you approve of wife number 2? Or will you find reasons to undermine that relationship too?" She didn't answer, but I could see the truth in her eyes. "I thought so," I said softly. "You know what the really tragic part is? I actually wanted to love you. I wanted to be part of this family, that you never gave me a chance." The front door opened and Dylan's voice called out, "Mom." "Wren? I'm here." Constance and I looked at each other for a long moment. "Don't tell him about the papers," she said urgently. "Let me talk to him first. We can fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Constance. I'm done trying to prove I'm wife material to someone who was never going to accept me anyway. Dylan appeared in the doorway, handsome and smiling, carrying a bottle of wine. "Hey, what are you two talking about?" "Your future," I said simply. Over the next hour, while we ate Constance's pot roast and made stilted conversation about Dylan's work and the weather, I watched my husband and his mother with new eyes. I saw how she managed to work criticism of me into every topic. My career was demanding too much of my time. Our house needed more traditional decorating. Had I been sleeping enough because I looked tired? I saw how Dylan deflected her comments with nervous laughter instead of defending me. I saw how he sought her approval for every opinion, every decision, every thought that crossed his mind. Most of all, I saw how little space there was for me in their relationship, and how little Dylan seemed to realize or care about that fact. After dinner, Dylan went outside to help his uncle with something in the garage, leaving Constance and me alone in the kitchen. "Please don't do this," she said quietly as we loaded the dishwasher. "I know we've had our differences, but Dylan needs you." "Dylan needs a lot of things," I replied. "He needs to learn how to set boundaries with his mother. He needs to understand that marriage means choosing your spouse first. He needs to grow up and stop looking to you for permission to live his own life. But none of those are things I can give him." "You're being selfish. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally being honest about what I need from a marriage. And what I need is a partner who puts our relationship first. Not someone who sees me as an obstacle to his relationship with his mother." When we got home that evening, I told Dylan about the divorce papers. He went through all the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. He promised he'd talk to his mother, set boundaries, change everything. He begged me to go to counseling, to give him another chance, to not give up on our marriage. "It's too late, Dylan," I said as gently as I could. "I've been trying to make this work for 3 years. I've compromised and accommodated and swallowed my pride over and over again. I'm tired of fighting for a place in my own marriage. But I love you," he said, and I believed him. That was the saddest part. I knew he loved me, in his limited way. He just didn't love me enough to choose me. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Patricia was as thorough as promised, and Dylan's attorney, recommended by Constance, naturally was no match for her preparation and attention to detail. The house settlement was straightforward. Dylan kept the property, but had to buy out my share of the equity, $25,000, exactly half of what Constance had contributed as a wedding gift. The business valuation took longer, but the result was even more satisfying. Constance's gift of a 40% stake to Dylan had been legally transferred to our marriage, making it marital property. When the business was assessed for divorce purposes, my half of Dylan's stake came to $42,000, $67,000 total, more than Patricia had initially estimated, and every penny of it representing money that Constance had spent trying to control my marriage. The day the settlement was finalized, I did something I'd never done before. I sent Constance a thank you card. "Dear Constance," I wrote, "thank you for your generous contributions to my marriage to Dylan. As it turns out, your investments in our relationship have provided me with the financial foundation I need to start over. I hope you'll consider this an excellent return on your efforts to shape me into proper wife material. With gratitude, Wren." I mailed it to her house with a return address in Minneapolis, where I'd accepted a marketing director position with an agricultural technology company. The job was perfect: better salary, better benefits, and 800 miles away from Cedar Falls. Dylan called me 3 times after he found out about the card. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, as I was packing the last of my belongings into a moving truck, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Wren? It's Margaret, Dylan's Aunt Margaret." I was surprised. Margaret had always been kind to me but had never called before. "Hi, Margaret. What can I do for you?" "I just wanted you to know," she said carefully, "that not everyone in this family thought. You were the problem." I sat down on my empty couch, touched by her words. "Thank you for saying that. Constance is telling everyone that you were just after money, that you married Dylan for what you could get out of the family. What do you think?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I think you were after love and respect and a place in our family. And I think Constance made sure you never got any of those things." After we hung up, I sat in my empty house and thought about the story Constance was telling about me, the greedy wife who'd seduced her son and stolen his money. It was easier for her to believe that narrative than to confront the truth about her own behavior. But I knew the real story. I was the woman who'd spent 3 years trying to prove she was worthy of love from people who'd already decided she wasn't. I was the daughter-in-law who'd been judged and found wanting, not because of who I was, but because of who I wasn't. Constance, most importantly. I was the woman who'd finally realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's just getting free. The moving truck pulled away from my house in Cedar Falls on a bright Tuesday morning in October. As we drove through downtown past the coffee shop where Dylan and I had our first date, past the church where we'd gotten married, past the intersection where I'd spent 3 years of my life trying to become someone I was never meant to be, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Relief. 3 months later, I was settled into my new apartment in Minneapolis, thriving in my new job and exploring a city that felt full of possibilities. I joined a book club, started taking pottery classes, and was slowly building friendships based on who I actually was, rather than who someone else wanted me to become. I was having coffee with a colleague one afternoon when she mentioned she'd been watching videos on a YouTube channel called Revenge Treats. "You'd probably like it," she said. "It's all stories about people who got back at toxic family members. Very satisfying." That evening, I looked up the channel and found myself watching story after story of people who'd been underestimated, manipulated, or betrayed by the people closest to them. People who'd found creative ways to reclaim their power and self-respect. I thought about Constance's $67,000, now sitting in my savings account earning interest. I thought about Dylan, still living in our old house, still taking orders from his mother. I thought about the narrative she was spreading about me, the manipulative gold digger who'd broken up her perfect family. The truth was more complex and more satisfying than that. I wasn't a gold digger. I was a woman who'd discovered her own worth through the very process of being told she had none. Constance had spent 3 years trying to prove I wasn't wife material, and in the end, I'd proven she was right, just not in the way she'd intended. I wasn't wife material for Dylan Hartwell. I wasn't willing to disappear into someone else's vision of who I should be. I wasn't content to be managed and controlled and slowly erased. But I was exactly the right material for my own life. And that realization was worth more than any settlement check. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected piece of mail forwarded from my old address. It was a wedding invitation. Dylan was remarrying. The bride was a local girl named Amanda, someone I vaguely remembered from high school. The photo on the invitation showed Dylan looking happy, and Amanda looking radiant in a very traditional white dress. At the bottom of the invitation, in elegant script, was a line that made me smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell request the honor of your presence as their families become one." Mrs. Hartwell, not Mrs. Dylan Hartwell, Mrs. Constance Hartwell, even. On his wedding invitation, Dylan's mother had managed to make herself the star. I wondered how long it would take Amanda to realize what she'd signed up for. I wondered if she'd be stronger than I was, better at setting boundaries, more willing to fight for her place in her own marriage. But mostly, I hoped she'd figure out what it took me 3 years to learn. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you, even when walking away cost them more than they ever imagined it would. As for me, I kept the wedding invitation as a reminder, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained: my self-respect, my independence, and the knowledge that I was worth more than someone else's narrow definition of what I should be. That the story doesn't end there, because sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle in the most unexpected ways. A year after Dylan's second wedding, I was thriving in Minneapolis. My career had taken off beyond my wildest expectations. I'd been promoted to regional marketing director and was overseeing campaigns for 3 states. I'd also started dating Marcus, a veterinarian I'd met through my pottery class. He was everything. Dylan wasn't confident enough in himself to celebrate my successes, secure enough in our relationship to encourage my independence, and wise enough to understand that a partnership meant 2 whole people choosing each other, not one person. Disappearing into the other's family dynamics, Marcus had heard the whole story about Dylan and Constance, and his reaction had been refreshingly straightforward. "She sounds exhausting," he'd said. "I can't imagine trying to compete with a mother-in-law for my own wife's attention." Dylan must have been miserable too, even if he couldn't admit it. That perspective, that Dylan had been as trapped by his mother's control as I had been, took me a long time to accept. But Marcus was right. Constance hadn't just stolen my place in the marriage. She'd stolen Dylan's chance to be a real husband. I was thinking about that one evening in late spring when my phone rang with a familiar area code. For a moment, I thought it might be Dylan, but the voice on the other end was female, shaky, and definitely not Constance. "Wren? This is Amanda Hartwell, Dylan's wife." I sat up straighter, surprised. "Amanda, hi. Is everything okay? I'm sorry to bother you. I got your number from Margaret. I hope that's okay." "Of course. What's going on?" There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily, like she was trying not to cry. "I think I made a mistake," she finally said. "A really big mistake." Over the next hour, Amanda told me a story that was depressingly familiar. Constance had been sweet as pie during their courtship, welcoming and supportive and full of advice about what Dylan liked and needed. But the moment the wedding rings were exchanged, the real Constance had emerged. "She has opinions about everything," Amanda said, her voice tight with frustration. "How I dress, how I cook, how I decorate our house, which is the same house you used to live in. By the way, she still has a key. She still shows up whenever she wants. And Dylan he doesn't see it, or he doesn't want to see it." "What was the final straw?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "We've been trying to have a baby," she said, and my heart sank. "We've been to a fertility specialist, just like you and Dylan did. And somehow, Constance found out about the appointments. She started leaving pamphlets around our house about adoption and natural remedies and stress reduction. Then last week, she told Dylan she thought maybe we should take a break from putting so much pressure on ourselves and focus on enjoying married life." "Let me guess," I said. "Dylan thought that sounded reasonable. How did you know?" "Because I lived it, Amanda. All of it. The interference, the boundary violations, the way she makes you feel like you're being unreasonable for wanting privacy in your own marriage. I found out she's been talking to people at church about our fertility issues," Amanda continued, her voice breaking, "asking for prayers for Dylan and his struggles at home. She's made our private medical situation into community gossip. And when I confronted Dylan about it, he said I was overreacting." Closed my eyes, remembering my own conversations with Dylan, my own desperate attempts to make him understand what his mother was doing to us. "Amanda," I said carefully, "why are you calling me?" "Because Margaret told me what happened with your divorce about The settlement. About how you got half of everything Constance had put into your marriage. And Dylan brought me into the family business too, as a wedding gift. Constance made a big show of it, said she wanted to welcome me properly into the family. 25% ownership, all documented and official. I felt a familiar stirring of satisfaction. And you're wondering about your legal options. I'm wondering if there's any way out of this that doesn't leave me with nothing. Dylan makes good money, but most of our assets are tied up in that business or in the house that his mother basically controls. If I leave with nothing, I'll have to start over from scratch. Where are you now? Sitting in my car in the parking lot of a McDonald's, because it's the only place I can talk without Dylan or his mother overhearing me. The desperation in her voice took me back to those final months of my marriage, when I'd felt so trapped and isolated that even a conversation with a friend felt like an act of rebellion. Amanda, I said, I'm going to give you the name of my divorce attorney, Patricia Chen in Des Moines. She give you a free consultation and explain your options. You do that? Even though I married your ex-husband. Especially because you married my ex-husband. You're going through something that no woman should have to go through alone. But what if Dylan finds out I called a lawyer? What if Constance finds out? Then you'll know exactly where you stand, Amanda. I spent 3 years of my life trying to prove I was worthy of acceptance from people who had already decided I wasn't. Don't make the same mistake I did. You don't owe anyone a performance of happiness when you're miserable. We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the time we hung up, Amanda sounded stronger, more determined. I gave her Patricia's direct number and made her promise to call within the week. Why are you helping me? She asked as we were saying goodbye. Because Constance doesn't get to destroy another woman's life just to keep control of her son. And because every woman deserves to know what her marriage is actually worth. Legally speaking, 3 months later, Amanda called me again. This time her voice was steady and confident. I filed, she said without preamble. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, angry, free, all at the same time. That sounds about right. What happened when you told Dylan? He went through the same stages you described. Denial, anger, bargaining. He promised to set boundaries with his mother. Go to counseling, change everything. But when I asked him to prove it by asking Constance to return her key to our house, he said I was being unreasonable. And Constance? Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in it. She told Dylan I was obviously unstable and needed professional help. She suggested he have me committed for a psychiatric evaluation. My blood ran cold. She what? Oh, it gets better, she also told him that she'd suspected I was only after money from the beginning, and that this proved she was right about me being a gold digger. The irony is staggering, right? The woman who literally bought her way into controlling both of her sons. Marriages is calling other people gold diggers. How's the settlement looking? Patricia says I'm looking at about $40,000 from the business stake, plus half the house equity. Constance put down another $25,000 on our house, just like she did with yours. So you're looking at roughly $65,000. All of it money that Constance invested in trying to control your marriage. Exactly. And the best part? Dylan's going to have to ask his mother for a loan to pay me out, which means she have even more leverage over his life. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I feel sorry for him. I'm angry at him for not protecting our marriage. But I also see now that he's as much a victim of his mother's manipulation as we were. The difference is, we got strong enough to leave. He never will. Amanda was right. Dylan would probably spend the rest of his life in some version of the same pattern-finding women who loved him, bringing them into his mother's sphere of influence, and then watching helplessly as Constance systematically undermined each relationship He'd never learned to set boundaries because he'd never been allowed to develop the emotional tools necessary for independence. Are you going to be okay financially? I asked. More than okay. I've been working as a nurse practitioner throughout our marriage, and I never gave up my career like Constance kept suggesting. I should. The settlement will give me enough to put a down payment on my own place and start fresh. I'm actually looking at opportunities in Denver. Denver sounds perfect. New city, new life, no history. That's the plan, Wren. I want you to know talking to you that night probably saved my sanity. I was starting to think maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I was expecting too much from marriage. You weren't. You were expecting the bare minimum respect, privacy, and a partner who would choose you first. That's not too much to ask. I know that now, and I'm never settling for less again. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the strange symmetry of it all. 2 women, 2 marriages to the same man, 2 settlements funded by the same controlling mother-in-law. Constance had now spent over $130,000 trying to buy influence over her son's relationships, and all she had to show for it was 2 ex-daughters-in-law who were thriving without her family's toxic dynamics. I wondered if she'd learned anything from the pattern, or if she'd just find new ways to justify her behavior. 6 months later, I got my answer. Margaret called me one afternoon with news that was both shocking and entirely predictable. Dylan's engaged. Again, she said without preamble. Already? Amanda's divorce was just finalized 3 months ago. Her name is Bethany. She's 24. Works as a dental hygienist, seems very sweet, very malleable. Let me guess Constance loves her. Oh, Constance is over the moon. She's already planning the wedding, talking about how Bethany is exactly the kind of wife Dylan needs. Someone who understands the importance of family and won't cause the kind of drama his previous wives did. Previous wives, plural, like we're just a series of failed experiments. That's exactly how she talks about it. Like Dylan's been the victim of 2 manipulative women who took advantage of his good nature. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was different now, cleaner, less personal. Constance's rewriting of history couldn't touch me anymore because I knew the truth. And more importantly, I built a life that proved my worth every single day. Margaret, I said, do you think she ever stopped? Do you think she ever let Dylan have a real marriage? Honestly, I think she's getting worse the older she gets, the more desperate she becomes to maintain control. And Dylan's never going to change. He's almost 40 years old and he still looks to his mother for approval on everything from what he eats for breakfast to who he sleeps next to at night. What about Bethany? Does she have any idea what she's walking into? I don't think so. She seems genuinely in love with Dylan, and he can be very charming when he wants to be. Plus, Constance is on her best behavior right now. The real Constance won't emerge until after the wedding, just like she did with you and Amanda. Should someone warn her? Margaret was quiet for a long time. Would you have listened if someone had tried to warn you? She was right, of course. Love makes us deaf to warnings about the people we've chosen. We all think our situation is different, our love stronger, our ability to change people more powerful than reality suggests. Maybe, I said finally, but probably not. Bethany's going to have to learn the same lessons you and Amanda did, the hard way. That evening, I told Marcus about the conversation. We were cooking dinner together in my kitchen, our kitchen, really, since he'd been spending most nights at my apartment for the past few months. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, I said, chopping vegetables for our stir-fry, knowing exactly what's going to happen and being powerless to stop it. You're not powerless, Marcus said, stirring the sauce. You and Amanda both found your way out. This Bethany will too, if she's strong enough. And if she's not, then she'll spend her life being unhappy in a marriage that serves everyone's needs except hers. That's her choice to make. Marcus was right, but it still bothered me. Not because I had any lingering feelings for Dylan, those had died long before our divorce was final, but because Constance was out there, still operating the same playbook, still convinced that destroying other women's happiness was a reasonable price to pay for maintaining control over her son. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Bethany, Dylan's fiancée. I know this is weird, but could we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "How did you get my number?" "Margaret gave it to me. I asked her for it." "What did you want to talk about?" "I think you know." I did know. And despite my better judgment, despite Marcus's gentle suggestion that I was getting too involved in my ex-husband's life, despite my own hard-earned wisdom about not trying to save people who weren't ready to save themselves, I agreed to meet her. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Minneapolis. I'd driven down from my apartment, and she'd made the 4-hour drive from Cedar Falls. She was younger than I'd expected, with shoulder-length blonde hair and the kind of earnest, open face that made it easy to see why Dylan had been attracted to her. She was also obviously nervous, fidgeting with her engagement ring, not his. Grandmother's diamond, I noticed, but something new and modern. "Thank you for meeting me," she said after we'd gotten our coffee and found a quiet corner table. "What's going on, Bethany?" "I think Dylan's mother hates me," she said without preamble. I almost laughed. "What makes you think that?" "Little things. Comments about my appearance, my job, my family. Questions about whether I really understand what it means to be married to someone in Dylan's position. Suggestions that I might want to consider staying home once we're married. And what does Dylan say when she does these things? That's just how she is. That she means well. That she's protective because Dylan's been hurt before by women who didn't appreciate him." The familiar phrases hit me like a punch to the stomach. Even the wording was identical to what Dylan had said to me, what he'd probably said to Amanda. "Bethany," I said carefully, "why did you want to meet with me?" "Because Margaret told me about your settlement, about how you got money from Constance when you divorced Dylan. And you're wondering about your legal options. I'm wondering if I'm crazy for thinking this engagement is a mistake." "Tell me what happened." Over the next 2 hours, Bethany told me a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. The whirlwind courtship where Constance had been supportive and welcoming. The engagement where she'd suddenly become critical and controlling. The wedding planning where every decision Bethany made was subtly undermined or outright overruled. "Already picked out my dress," Bethany said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Without asking me, she said she knew exactly what would be appropriate for a Hartwell family wedding, and she didn't want me to feel overwhelmed by having to make such an important decision. And Dylan was okay with this. He said his mother has good taste and it was generous of her to take care of such an expensive purchase. The dress cost $3,000, which is more than I make in a month. Let me guess you hate it. It's beautiful, but it's not me. It's what she thinks I should look like, not who I actually am. What else? She's planning the entire reception without consulting me. She's chosen the menu, the flowers, the music, even the guest list. When I tried to add some of my college friends, she said the venue had limited capacity and we needed to prioritize. Family. By family, she means people she approves of. Exactly, and Wren. Here's the thing that really scares me. She's already talking about grandchildren. About how important it is for me to start thinking about my role as a mother. About how a woman's highest calling is raising the next generation of Hartwells. I felt a chill run down my spine. How does Dylan react when she says things like that? He gets this look on his face, like he's proud that his mother is so invested in our future. Like her interest in my reproductive timeline is evidence of how much she cares about our family. Bethany, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Do you love Dylan, or do you love the idea of being married? She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. I thought I loved Dylan, she finally said. But lately, I'm not sure I actually know who Dylan is underneath. All of his mother's expectations. That's a very wise observation. Margaret told me that Dylan has never lived anywhere but Cedar Falls. Never had a job that wasn't connected to his family's business. Never made a major decision without consulting his mother first. That's all true. How do you build a marriage with someone who's never learned to be independent? You don't. You become part of their dependence. Or you get crushed trying to change them. Bethany was quiet again, processing this. What was your marriage actually like? I told her the truth. About the constant criticism, the boundary violations. The way Constance had systematically eroded my confidence and my sense of self. I told her about the fertility appointments, the kitchen rearranging. The way Dylan had always chosen his mother's comfort over my basic dignity. But the thing that really broke my heart, I said, was realizing that Dylan wasn't just allowing his mother to treat me that way. He genuinely didn't understand why. It was a problem. He'd been so conditioned to see her approval as the measure of rightness that he couldn't recognize her behavior as toxic. Do you think he'll ever change? Honestly? No. Dylan is almost 40 years old, and if 2 divorces haven't been enough to make him examine his relationship with his mother, nothing will. What about Amanda? Dylan's second wife. Same story, same ending. Constance drove her away too. And Dylan never understood why. Bethany nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. What are you going to do? I don't know. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Everyone's expecting it. My parents have already bought plane tickets, taken time off work. Bethany, can I tell you something that might save you years of heartache? Please, disappointing people. By calling off a wedding is embarrassing and expensive and socially awkward, but it's nothing compared to the pain of spending years in a marriage where you're constantly fighting for basic respect and recognition. You really think it won't get better once we're married? I think it will get worse, much worse. Once you're legally bound to Dylan, Constance will have no reason to pretend to like you anymore. We talked for another hour, and by the time we parted ways, Bethany seemed calmer but more determined. She didn't tell me what she was planning to do, but something in her posture suggested she'd already made her decision. 2 weeks later, Margaret called me with news that was shocking even by Hartwell family standards. Bethany called off the wedding. She said without preamble. When? Yesterday, apparently. She met with Dylan and Constance together and told them she couldn't go through with it. She gave back the ring, returned the dress, and moved out of the apartment she was sharing with Dylan. How did they react? Dylan was devastated, according to my sources. But Constance was furious. She's telling everyone that Bethany was obviously just after money and gifts, and that she must have been having an affair to explain why she'd throw away such a good opportunity. Of course she is. It couldn't possibly be that Bethany saw through her manipulation and decided she wanted better for herself. The really interesting part, Margaret continued, is that Bethany left a letter for Dylan. Apparently she was very specific about why she was ending the engagement, and she mentioned both you and Amanda by name. What did she say? That she'd talked to Dylan's ex-wives and realized she was walking into the same pattern that had destroyed 2 previous marriages, that she refused to spend her life competing with his mother for his attention and loyalty. Good for her. Dylan showed the letter to Constance and she absolutely lost her mind. She's demanding to know how Bethany got in contact with you and Amanda, threatening legal action for interference in her son's relationships. I laughed. Legal action for what? Having conversations with grown women who asked to talk to me. Exactly, but Wren, I think this is a turning point for the first time. Someone has called Constance out directly for her behavior. And Dylan can't pretend it's just a coincidence that all three of his relationships have ended for the same reasons. Do you really think Dylan will finally see the pattern? I don't know, but I think Constance is starting to realize that her reputation in town is being affected by all of this. People are talking, connecting dots, wondering what's really going on in the Hartwell family. What kind of talk? The kind that suggests maybe the problem isn't Dylan's choice in women. Maybe the problem is Dylan's mother. For the first time in our entire conversation, I felt genuinely sorry for Constance. Not because she didn't deserve the consequences of her behavior, but because she was about to face something she'd never had to deal with before. Social judgment and community gossip about her own actions. In a small town like Cedar Falls, reputation was everything, and Constance had spent so many years positioning herself as the perfect mother and devoted widow that having her manipulation exposed would be devastating to her carefully constructed image. Margaret, I said, what happens now? Now Constance has to live with the fact that she's driven away 3 women who could have made her son happy. And Dylan has to decide whether he wants to keep living his life according to his mother's script, or whether he finally wants to grow up and take responsibility for his own choices. 6 months later, I heard through Margaret that Dylan had started seeing a therapist. Apparently, Bethany's letter had included a suggestion that he might benefit from professional help in understanding why his relationships kept following the same pattern. Whether the therapy would actually help remained to be seen. Change was possible, even for someone as deeply conditioned as Dylan, but it would require him to confront some very uncomfortable truths about his relationship with his mother. As for Constance, Margaret reported that she'd become something of a pariah in their social circle. The story of 3 broken engagements and marriages had spread, and people were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about her role in her son's relationship failures. She started seeing a therapist too. Margaret told me during one of our regular check-in calls, whether that's voluntary or court-ordered as part of some kind of family counseling. I don't know. The idea of Constance in therapy was both satisfying and terrifying. Either she'd learn to recognize her toxic behavior and change, or she'd learn new ways to manipulate and control while appearing more reasonable on the surface. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I built a life that was completely independent of the Hartwell family drama, and I was determined to keep it that way. Constance had been right about one thing. I wasn't wife material. I was so much more than that. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it, because sometimes the most important thing we can do is remind each other that we're worth more than the roles others try to F.